Akunna, Book 1, The Age of Ekwensu Trilogy, a novella by Oma. Narrated by Austin Okeke. Audio production by Pillar 1. Author's note. The Age of Ekwensu Trilogy is a work of African futuristic fiction that draws inspiration from Igbo cosmology, ordinary indigenous knowledge systems, and the rich oral traditions of West Africa. While elements of mythology and cultural practices appear in this story, they are interpreted through the lens of speculative storytelling. This work is not intended to represent religious doctrine or historical record, but rather to imagine a world where ancestral knowledge, advanced technology, and cosmic mysteries intersect. As the author, I acknowledge the enduring wisdom embedded in Igbo oral traditions and honors the storytellers, ancestors, and cultures that continue to inspire new visions of the future. Oma. EGEDE. Chapter 1. After a long overdue renaissance swept across West Africa, the nation of EGEDE rose from the bones of former Nigeria, a sovereign homeland forged at last for the Igbo people. Its flag was impossible to ignore. A field of white bearing a golden rising sun at its center, encircled by red stars. It shimmered from car windows, glowed from LED projectors mounted on traffic lights, and floated above government towers in every major city. The image followed you wherever you went, as though the nation itself insisted on being seen. It was into this modern, though no longer new country that Akunna was born. He arrived in the Omambala region during the second Izu market week of Onwa Ozoarusi, the final month of the lunar year. He was born at sunrise on Nkwo market day. And the day did not behave normally. According to his mother, Ezewanyugu, the sky above Isiora darkened that morning, but no rain fell. A heavy stillness settled across the land. People spoke in hushed tones, as though something unseen, almost sinister, had entered the community and was listening. Behind the EOG Oracle shrine, the alligators that never left the lake crawled out together and gathered at the entrance. They stood motionless, facing the shrine doors, just waiting. No one in living memory had ever seen such a thing. It was while Ezewanyugu labored that the Onowu of Isiora came. His visit was unannounced. He has not been requested. Men like him did not attend childbirths. The Onowu was kingmaker, right hand to any living Agabaidu, custodian of succession. Barely a year had passed since the Agabaidu had traveled to return to them soon. And in Isiora, no one was permitted to speak of his death or a new coronation until 3 years had passed. If asked where he was, they were required to answer indirectly with such sayings as, "Agabaidu has traveled to return to us soon." Anything else invited imbalance or worse, misfortune. When asked why he had come, the Onowu only said, "The ancestors told me to witness what is about to enter this community." That was enough. Silence deepened amongst those who were already present in the compound. Floating beside him was his staff, Akajiofo. Akajiofo, an artificially intelligent construct forged in alloy and light. It levitated without visible support, humming softly as it scanned its surroundings. At intervals, it rang out the metallic echo of an ogene gong, followed by a chant in theatrical voice. Agabani. The sound carried beyond the compound walls, such that no one could miss that the Onowu was there. Less than an hour after her labor began, Ezewanyugu gave birth to Akunna. the child seemed eager to enter the world into his new life. When the senior Neoji extended her Nzu-covered palms, the baby seemed to leap forward as though delivered by an unseen current. He landed in her hands with a strength that startled even her. He did not cry immediately. They saw him first, dark-skinned, full-bodied, and marked. From his scalp to the soles of his feet, glowing woolly lines traced his flesh, intricate patterns alive with gold light. They shimmered faintly, shifting as though responding to breath, to pulse, to something alive beneath his dark skin. The room inhaled sharply. Then he opened his mouth. His first cry tore through the compound. Thunder answered from the skies and rain fell. Though his father was not present to perform the Igwozo honors, his Umunna stood in his place, led by MAZI Afam, the younger brother now bearing the weight of the Asiebele lineage. They stepped into the sudden downpour. Akunna's placenta was placed in his uncle's hands. He knelt beside the newly planted palm tree, the Nkwalo, dug the earth wider with his bare hands, and laid the afterbirth into the soil. When he covered it, the ground trembled faintly. Then it happened. A thick green mist rose from the wet earth. Neither steam nor smoke. It was mist, luminous and slow, curling upwards and hovering around the young palm tree like a sentinel spirit reluctant to depart. Someone in the gathering gasped. The mist did not disperse with the rain. It lingered on. And from somewhere beyond the compound walls, 3 turtles emerged and encircled the tree, forming a triangle around the swelling green light. No one dared approach them. In EGEDE, news did not sleep. The machines that cleaned the streets were always listening. They gathered fragments of conversations, filtered them through distant servers, and returned what they deemed important back into the air as public knowledge. It was how the nation stayed coherent after the collapse of the old digital empires. So, when EGWUREGWU withdrew from public life after her marriage, the streets spoke of it. And when her husband died, they spoke louder. MAZI Asiebele, considered a genius by many, had perished in an Ogwu experiment gone wrong. The sting of his death remained swollen in the chest of his household. And worse, EGWUREGWU, his wife, had been pregnant. In Isiora, it was rare for a woman to carry a child while mourning her husband. People whispered that it bent the world's balance. Some even said it was abominable. EGWUREGWU ignored them all. She left for a time to her mother's people in Aba while her husband was buried. She returned only after the final rites were complete and the compound cleansed. When rumors rose that her newborn son would be the next Agabaidu, she laughed.
"A mouth that is idle must eat something,"
she told her kin. In her heart, she already knew the truth. Her son's destiny was larger than the custodian of one small town. Idemili did not demand a price only to repeat an old story. Still, she allowed the Onowu to attend Akunna's first Afar divination. The one she trusted less was MAZI Afam, her in-law. Since his brother's passing, something in his gaze had changed. It lingered too long, not openly disrespectful, never that, but suspicious regardless. Yet, whenever he was present, she always maintained her calm and said nothing. This was not a season for new wars. Akunna's first Afar divination took place 12 days after his birth. The Uli line still glowed on his skin, golden, leaving patterns that seemed always in motion. Until they faded, no one touched him except his mother and the senior Nneoji. Only those selected by EGEDE were allowed in the room. The newborn, his mother, the senior Nneoji, MAZI Afam, the Onowu, and the Akajiofo to record. The EOG priest arrived and was received properly. Kola was presented and accepted. Nzu was offered and applied by all present. He spread his animal skin mat and sat down. He brought out his kpakpandu pod to confirm the child's horoscope. He placed his ugiri strings upon the mat, cowries, coins, and seeds drawn from a tortoise shell. Then he began to chant.
Ekede, kunye.
EGEDE, the great mother, rise.
Agadi nwanyị asịrị, kunye.
Ancient mother of divination, rise.
Nne kunye.
Great mother of divination spirits, rise.
Ezumezu agwụ isi ọra, kunye.
Divination spirits of Isiora, rise.
Chiubosi, kunye.
Daytime, rise.
Chiefo,
It is dawn.
Chinkwọmụrụ nwa, kunye.
Nkwomake day that gave us this child, rise.
Ihe ojii isi ọra, kunye.
The oracle of Isiora, rise.
Ọnụ oke, ọnụ nwunye,
Masculine and feminine voices.
ọnụ nze, ọnụ ọmaalụ,
The voice of the initiated and uninitiated.
idemmili nne nwa,
Idemmili, mother of the child.
ala nne nwa,
Allah, mother of the child.
ọhụ mmụọ be nna,
Cohort of spirit forces from the father's side.
nnu mmụọ be nne,
Legend of spirit forces from the mother's side.
ogilishi nnukwu mmụọ,
Ogilishi, the mighty tree.
ọma mbala osimiri ata ata,
Omambala, the mighty river.
kunye unu,
Rise up, all of you.
eke na-achị, jụọ ala,
Great spirits, commune with the earth mother.
jụọ ara obi na-abụ,
Ask the great spirit of the forest questions.
ndị ichie nwoke na nwaanyị, bịa kwuo okwu,
Great ancestors, come and talk your own.
gwa anyị ebe nwata a siri,
Tell us smoothly where the child came from,
ife ọ bịara ebe a ime,
what it came here to do.
ezumezu, kunyenu kwuo okwu.
All spirit forces, rise and speak now. When the chants were complete, he threw his ugiri seeds and spoke.
This child's mouth shall not know fufu. This child's tongue shall not taste the white man's alcohol. Its hair shall not be cut without its consent, its mother's consent, and the consent of its age group. Its feet shall not leave Isiora before 7 seasons pass. This child shall not marry. It shall not eat snail, reptile, or forbidden flesh. Its eyes shall not look upon what its spirit rejects. It shall not wear the skin of agui. It shall not eat cassava. Hear me well. This child is Ogbanje. It has come from the world unknown. It is Onyemiri, a child of water. It is a child of Allah. It was kin to Amadioha Ekwensu. It has lived in the sun. It has stood upon the moon. It is Amosu. It carries 4 Onyuwachi. It must not join masquerade cults, for it is already a masquerade. A spirit cannot mirror itself twice.
He spoke for over 30 minutes, outlining taboos and gifts. But he said nothing of the alligators that had emerged from the village river and stood still in front of the deity shrine that morning. Nothing of the rain, nothing of the green mist, nothing of the turtles, and nothing of the unspoken Agabaidu question. When MAZI Afam asked about the signs, the priest rebuked him sharply, asking whether divination must also supply common sense. That ended the matter. When the Onowu asked about the Agabaidu issue, the priest advised them to listen to the child's mother. Before leaving, he reminded Ezenwanyugo, whom he addressed as Mmiridiegwu, to perform minor sacrifices to loosen the holds of previous lives and allow her son's spirit to guide him freely. He rubbed Unzu upon the baby's forehead. Then he left. When the room emptied, only Ezenwanyugo and the Onowu remained. At her request, Akajiofo drifted outside. Mmiridiegwu, the Onowu said quietly. I must ask what I cannot ask in the open. He spoke of the chant, how his staff had repeated Agabaidu without instruction, how it had felt less like malfunction and more like announcement. He had seen succession disputes split families apart. He had buried men who stood too near ambition. If this child stands in that path, he said carefully, the town will not remain whole. Ezenwanyugo waited before answering.
My son will not contest that stool,
She said at last.
The Obakuba line will keep what is theirs.
She explained the likely cause of Akajiofor's proclamation, the close match between Akunna's horoscope and that of the late Agabaidu. Machines could detect resonance without discerning destiny. The Onowu studied her face. He believed her. Relief softened his posture. He had served 2 Agabaidu. He did not crave unrest. Then, let him be what he is meant to be, he said. Before departing, he transferred the divination records from Akajiofo into Anwuni, Ezenwanyugo's own device. When he left Asiebele compound that evening, the rain had stopped. And for the first time since the sky had darkened that morning, Isiora began to breathe normally again. MAZI Asiebele. Chapter 2. MAZI Ufodelichukwu Asiebele, husband to Ezenwanyugo and father to Akunna, had been one of the most respected scientists in Isiora. He was known for his inventions, for daring, for curiosity that bordered on defiance. His most famous creation was the Kpakpando software, a system that allowed families to read their horoscopic lineage across generations. With the proper code combinations, one could trace ancestral patterns up to 14 generations back. But access was never simple. Every reading required a full Akaraka palm scan. Every inquiry left a record. The deeper one wished to look, the more codes were required. Codes obtainable only through elders or dibias of the relevant lineage. No anonymous searching or casual intrusion whatsoever was allowed. Kpakpando was built off a problem that was very hard to solve at the time. It was licensed to major technology firms across EGEDE, embedded in personal devices and institutional systems alike. Its internal architecture ran on NCBD code structures. When exported beyond Igbo territories, he adapted it with Adinkra logic systems. His only non-negotiable condition was, it must never be used maliciously. That alone made him revered. But the software was only the surface of his genius. He was equally known for experimenting with EGWU technologies and engaging Alusi forces, including those tied to his own lineage, despite repeated warnings from cautious relatives. This reckless curiosity earned him names. Moneri Mo, a spirit that eats spirits. Chikali Dibia, a chi greater than Dibias. Some said it in admiration, others said it out of fear. It was during one such experiment involving an alusi force known as Ibobo that he met his end. Or so people believed. The truth of his death, like the truth of his birth, was known fully only to one person, his wife. For a man devoted to decoding mysteries, his own life was steeped in them. Among elders of the Asiebele family, a strange rumor persisted that his mother had never been pregnant. The tale said that his parents had found him behind the house one evening, on a stretch of farmland that seemed to widen endlessly into dusk. He had been lying inside a wide clay bowl, a green snake coiled around his body. When they lifted him, the snake vanished. They brought him inside. Soon after, they announced him as their firstborn son. No one could confirm the story. His parents never addressed it publicly. In time, 5 more children were born to them, all younger than Ufodilichukwu, and no one within the family dared challenge his place as the eldest. In their household, none of the rumors mattered. His legitimacy was not questioned. Still, the rumors survived. As a child, Ufodilichukwu suffered from relentless dreams. In them, he saw a kingdom on a distant planet, not Earth, under siege. He saw a woman who felt like his mother. She was tall, dark-skinned like him. Her hair moved like living serpents. Her eyes burned bright green. She wore armor that clung to her body like a second skin. In every dream, she boarded a ship with others like her, holding a child, him, wrapped in her arms. Behind them, the sky burned. Nuclear fire consumed their world. The ship prepared to flee. He never saw whether or not it escaped. Each time, he woke before liftoff, sweating and breathless. The nightmares were so severe that he slept in his parents' room until nearly 7 years old. Eventually, his father consulted a renowned dibia from Okija, and rituals were performed. Afterward, the nightmares stopped. But the images did not disappear. They simply changed form, from dreams into memories in his head. Years later, when he was strong enough to bear the truth, his parents called him into their room. He swore on kola nut and the family of 4 that he would never repeat what they were about to tell him. Then they told him everything. They described the evening on the farm, the wail that drew them against their will, the towering woman behind the tree, her serpent-like hair, the child in her arms. They said fear had held them in place until she touched them with a staff. Calm flooded their bodies. Familiarity replaced terror. She spoke in a language they understood. She handed them the child. She begged them to protect him. A dark cloud hung over the farm. She ran towards it, and a burst of white light followed. When they recovered, she was gone. The child in their arms looked fully human. The serpentine hair had become ordinary curls. They stayed indoors for 8 market weeks after that, receiving no visitors, dismissing their workers. When they returned to public life, they announced their son. When they finished telling him, they expected his reaction to be one of shock. Instead, Ufodilichukwu said quietly that he remembered. He remembered everything from the moment he was handed over. He remembered his other mother. He had simply chosen silence. They wept together that day, from relief, from gratitude, from something like awe. After that, the subject was never spoken of again. Ufodilichukwu grew into his role as firstborn without hesitation. Rumors never deterred him. He helped on the farms. He mentored his siblings. He studied patterns others could not see. He saw numeric codes in leaves, geometric formulas in children's games, spiral logic in the turns of Koso boards. When playmates complained that he turned everything into a lecture, he stopped trying to explain and began writing instead. Tablets, journals, walls of coded thought. His mind was always building. Over time, the community's suspicions shifted into pride. Even the Umuada women began quietly revising history, claiming witnesses to his mother's labor. It was their way of saying, "He is ours." By adulthood, his reputation was untouchable. He met EGWUREGWU at the Ofala festival of the Obi of Onitsha. The crowd had overwhelmed her, so she slipped away to a quiet field behind the main compound where the event was taking place. He had already found it before her. He stood there with his eyes closed in full traditional attire, long chief's gown, akwete wrapper, polished wine-colored shoes, black cap trimmed with gold, a single eagle feather fixed above it. She noticed immediately that his color coordination needed help. He spoke before opening his eyes. "Is it so strange?" he asked, "to find a man seeking peace from noise, the same as you?" She was startled. They laughed. They sat in silence for a while, at complete ease in each other's presence. When her phone rang, she gave him her number before leaving. He called the next evening.
Hi.
After that, not a day passed without conversation. Ofodilichukwu had mastered machines, codes, and spirits, but he had never mastered romance. He worked too much. He analyzed too deeply. As a child, other children found him exhausting, but with her, he did not need to translate himself. Within a month, he told her things no one else knew. How he used a bitter kola ointment to suppress the unnatural growth and movement of his facial hair. How patterns streamed into his mind uninvited. How some codes felt downloaded rather than discovered. She did not flinch from all the new information. She told him she sometimes saw EGEDE in flesh, that deities visited her, that matter behaved differently in other realms. When he told her the truth of his origin, she simply laughed gently at his worry.
There are many other worlds,
she told him.
and many doors.
Within 6 months, marriage was inevitable. No one was surprised. A genius and a high priestess. Code and current. Logic and water. It made sense. They were married for 3 years before deciding to conceive. 6 months into her pregnancy, he began installing a new satellite over Isiora. It was powered by an Ogwu force, Ibobo, embedded into the ground as an energy source. The satellite's purpose was simple, in theory: to identify threats before they materialized, detect mineral resources beneath the land, feed intelligence back into Kpakpandu's systems. Protection? Prosperity? That was all. But such things which yield power are never that simple. Though the Agaba Edu at the time and Council of Elders approved the project, several families opposed it. They feared the Asiebele family already possessed too much influence. If the satellite revealed hidden minerals, who would control that knowledge? If it could scan Isiora's soil, could it not scan theirs? Threats were made, warnings delivered. Friendly Dibias cautioned him against waking the Ogwu Ibobo. In ancient times, they said, that force was used only during war. Ibobo as a force was meant to be summoned, then appeased, then silenced. It was not meant to remain active. He activated it anyway. The day after installation began, he was found dead in his home. Some believed ritual families arranged his death. Others believed Ibobo consumed what summoned it. No conclusion satisfied everyone. But one truth lingered on. He had awakened something truly bizarre. And something bizarre had answered back. Ekwensu. Chapter 3. The day Akunna was born, Ibobo, wife and other half of Ekwensu, crossed time and space in a small pod, a lightweight craft designed to be seen only if someone was truly looking. On Earth, humans had misnamed an Ogwu after her without understanding whose name they were borrowing. This small pod would not go completely unnoticed by the intergalactic watchers, but it would not invite unnecessary attention either. She entered the atmosphere of Isiora to witness the birth of her grandson, Akunna, a name her friend, her sister through ages, EGEDE, had permitted, not her. Ibobo did not hold grudges over such things, not anymore. Names were small in the scale of what she had endured. Her people had crossed epochs that would look like thousands of ages to humans. And Earth, this planet that dealt so cruelly with time, had almost forgotten her. It had done worse to her other half. Ekwensu had been demonized for centuries, made into an insult, a scapegoat, abused by mouths that did not understand what they invoked. Yet, Ibobo returned anyway. She hovered inside the clouds above Isiora on the morning her grandson was set to arrive, and the sky responded to her presence. The air thickened, light dimmed. The storm gathered with the slow patience of something ancient. If she wanted to, she could have made the whole world stand still. But she had been warned. No interference. No temper, no wildness. She did not like to go where she was not invited. This was the rule, the high order she had agreed to long ago. So far in the past that the current inhabitants of Earth could not remember it, could not comprehend it. It was the same high order she had broken once, the night she stopped on Earth and left her child Ufodilichukwu with mortals. The night she touched trembling earthlings with her grace, stripping fear from their bodies so they could accept the baby in their arms as one of their own. Now she was here again. Undetectable, undetected, but only for a short time. Long enough for a whole day of human time to pass. Short enough that the 30-minute veil she cast over her craft would expire before it drew the gaze of those who counted such anomalies across galaxies. She should not have returned. But the pool was older than logic. Maternal, territorial, instinct. Sometimes she could not resist this pull, especially when the right offerings were made to her likeness. And if there was anything her son knew how to do, it was that. Ufodilichukwu sat with her inside the small spacecraft while she watched the world below prepare for Akunna's arrival. He had learned long ago how to speak to her nature without speaking at all. Ibobo had come because of him, because of her son, the one she would soon rename, soon remake. And because he had done what only a trickster born of divine cloth would dare to do, he had deceived Earth with a substitute body and allowed them to believe he was dead. A clone. A clean lie. It was bold. It was dangerous. Yet, it was of his making. He kept mysteries the way his lineage did, revealing them only to those with the capacity to carry them. To minds not weakened by disbelief, to those who still had the nature of gods alive in their blood. His wife was one of them, EGEWUREGWU. Ufodilichukwu still had much to learn, still had many thresholds of acceptance to cross in the worlds beyond Earth. But he was Ibobo's son, and so long as he stood within her reach, no one would reject him openly. Not within her realms of influence anyway. And her influence was not bound to a single universe. It never had been. They watched the birth. They watched the sky answer the child. They watched the mist rise. They watched the world take the omen and turn it into rumor. When it was done, when the boy named Akunna Achalugo Asiebele had entered the earth, the grandmother and father returned to the world they had traveled from. They were happy to have witnessed his birth, and sad. Akunna would grow inside a world that would struggle to understand his kind for a long time. They could do nothing for him unless summoned. That was the limit. That was the order. They consoled themselves with one truth. For now, the child still had his mother, still had EGWUREGWU. And yet, even that comfort carried its own threat. Human love was unpredictable. Human fear could grow sharp. There was always the possibility that EGWUREGWU, despite her strength, would become overprotective and refuse to teach the boy the ways of summoning when the time came. She might shut the doors out of caution. She might hold him too tightly. If she blocked them when it was time to strengthen his connection, there was nothing Ibobo could do. To fight the mother of her grandson would be to challenge EGEDE. And even in Ibobo's full might, under the high order that governed her domains, that was inconceivable. So she hoped. She hoped the love EGWUREGWU still carried for Ufodelechukwu, the love they had basked in for 3 bright years before he had to leave, would remain hot enough to keep faith with the instructions he had left behind. Ekwensu waited in his glory on the massive landing pad where other spacecraft rested like sleeping beasts. When Ibobo's craft descended, the air around the platform shifted as the new reality made room for what was arriving. They were back on Mvu, the planet of the first ones. A place known across realms as a sanctuary where Ekwensu and Ibobo retreated whenever the noise of conquest became too loud. A place they could keep Ufodelechukwu close without drawing suspicion before he was remade and renamed for deeper travel through higher dimensions. Mvu was easier. Mvu was safer. On that purple planet, with 4 suns and 9 moons, there were beings who looked just like Ufodelechukwu. Entire families who had left Earth ages ago and become rulers there. They spoke Igbo too. Older, deeper, richer, an undiluted form of the language that sounded as if it had been wounded by history. Clouds on Mvu were residences. Some were cities. Some were doors. And many of those families still listened to prayers carried from Earth. Requests sent through ancient communication technologies they had left behind for descendants who remembered enough to call, enough to ask, enough to be answered. Mvu was one of many territories Ekwensu and Ibobo had conquered and built up from scratch, ages beyond human counting. Here, they had full control. No interference from companions, no oversight close enough to bite. The first time Ufodelechukwu saw Ekwensu in full light, in the image being war when he was on Mvu, he understood why the name carried fear across worlds. It was the same understanding that had struck him the first night his mother came to the assigned shaft that served as his accommodation. Ibobo moved with a holiness that was terrible, a beauty that warned you. At night, her serpent-like hair became fully alive, vibrating in strange motions under the influence of divine moans, possessed with divine breath. Observers always sensed it. even without being told that this was not her full form. This was a body adjusted for perception, a translation of her true divine image. That first night, Ibobo hugged Ufodilichukwu carefully, like he was a fragile thing. He was tall for a human, but not tall enough to match her. Until then, they had communicated mind to mind, through images projected as memory, carried through light waves across distance. A bond that did not break even when they were thousands of light years apart. She sat with him and said, "Ask." Then she warned him that time on Mvu would feel wrong at first. The planet stood in a higher dimension. Its atmosphere was denser, purer, too clean for Earth lungs. Ufodilichukwu wore a mask whenever he stepped outside his spacecraft or his assigned shaft. And before each meal, he ate bitter cola. He did not know why it helped. He only knew it did. The food itself was familiar enough though. Yams, sweet potatoes, even ukwa. That night, he asked what had haunted him since childhood. His story, his birth, the planet burning in his dreams, and why she had fled. Ibobo obliged him. When she spoke, her voice sounded like that of a ruler of worlds. "One of my sisters sought my aid over 1,000 moons ago," she said. "In your world, they are known as Akwali. We go by many names across many realms. Akwali and her partner needed help cleansing a planet they were losing. The planet was called Agadi, a wasteland of old ones." "Was?" Ufodilichukwu asked. "Yes," Ibobo said. "It was rubble, waste floating in space." She did not soften her tone. "There are things that happen among those you call gods that you do not understand. Cleansing is requested when lines are crossed, by gods, by creations, by war." She explained the rivalries Akwali faced, contested legitimacy, threats closing in. When Ibobo and Ekwensu arrived, they did the work of protection they were called on to do. They stayed back to receive offerings, as was the way of things. "And while we were there," she said, "I took a liking to a kind that lived on Agadi. Not human, but close enough to resemble it. One of them was called Asifa." Ufodilichukwu listened, feeling the old dream memory tighten inside his chest. "The day came," Ibobo continued, "when we received news of another attack. Akwali begged us to stay and fight. We divined with the Creator and discovered something else." She paused. "The planet was destined to be destroyed. A black hole waiting in its future," she said as if describing rain. "Akwali was fighting a pointless war. But gods are territorial. Destiny does not always stop desire." Ibobo's eyes held a distant light. "So, I chose a better gift. If the planet's fate was destruction, it did not mean we could not preserve the lifeline of its people." Ufodilichukwu frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Ibobo said, "we called Asifa, we took his seeds, and we carried a child of his kind to fruition." Ufodilichukwu's heart kicked hard. "So, Asifa is my father?" Ibobo's gaze sharpened. "Still yourself, child. Your mind is polluted with human ideas." The air in the room shifted. The walls trembled, then settled. "Asifa gave seed," she said. "But I am both your mother and your father. In my womb, with Ekwensu's blessing and Annie's protection, I made you into something new." She spoke the final words like law. "You are mine." Dilichukwu lowered his eyes. He remembered then that he had always known but sometimes forgot that her grace did not cancel her terror. It only concealed it. He apologized for interrupting. Igbobu continued. I birthed you during the war. I sheltered you with my sisters. The memory you carry of me fleeing, that was the day we left Agadi to take you and others to safety. What happened to the others? Dilichukwu asked. Your sisters, their babies. Igbobu stood. That is none of your business for now. She stepped closer and touched his face, warmth returning to her eyes. There is much you are yet to learn, much you are yet to understand. Be patient. Here you have time. Dilichukwu's mind still burned with one question, the shape of his connection to Ekwensu, but he did not ask aloud. Igbobu laughed anyway. Her laugh sounded like waves of smashing rocks. I already told you, she said. You have much to learn. Then she gave him what his mind reached for. I and Ekwensu were made from the same divine cloth in the Creator's hand. We are one and the same. Where you see me, you have seen him. And where you see him, you have seen me. She tilted her head, studying him. You perceive us as two because earth has made your mind weak. Be at ease. You will see more clearly soon. That ended the conversation. Igbobu left him alone with his thoughts. Dilichukwu felt small. On earth, he had never felt that way. Confused, insecure, uncertain of his own edges. On Mvu, this strange planet, in the presence of his mother's story, he felt like a child again. But another part of him, older, truer, born closer to divine origin, held steady. If he was insignificant, he would not have reached Mvu at all. Not from Earth. Definitely not alone. Not even the guardians of Udide, the cosmic spider and the mother's guardian spirit. He breathed. He waited. And while he waited, he noticed something. The hair on his head began to stir again. Subtle at first, then more clearly. Dancing like waves, answering to music no one else could hear. For the first time in his life, he did not reach for his bitter kola ointment. In that moment, he missed his wife, Ugochi, and his newborn son who had just entered the world below. Akunna. NKILI, Chapter 4. True to her many titles, Ekwensu, foremost Idemili priestess of Omambala, chief priestess of Allah, Agbalawani of Newi, her fatherland, Ada Diorama of Oshimiri Siora, her husband's community, a woman whose name carried weight across EGEDE. To mark the first year of her son, Akunna Achalugo Asiebele's life, the child whose birth had stilled Isiora, she announced something audacious. She would celebrate his first year with a festival, and she would invite NKILI, the communal masquerade. NKILI was no ordinary masquerade. It embodied ancestral spirits from both sides of a lineage. When summoned to bless the land in visible form, NKILI never came as one. It always arrived as at least 3. Only those of priestly or royal standing, or the Agaba Edu himself, could issue such an invitation. And every invitation was a risk. NKILI did not always answer. When they declined, they did so publicly. The host would suffer humiliation, their worth questioned before the entire community. The last time NKILI had appeared in Isiora was 9 years earlier, when the late Agabaedu celebrated 25 years on the throne. That day, thunder had split the skies as they emerged. For EGWUREGWU to summon NKILI for her son's first birthday was no small thing. It was a loud and very public declaration of her return. Beyond the birthday celebration though, she intended something else. She would reopen herself to public service. For 4 years she had withdrawn, first for love, then for pregnancy, then for mourning. Rumors had filled the silence. Some said she had lost her powers. Others said she had chosen marriage over her divine calling. She would end the speculation once and for all. The festival would be her ritual relaunch. Planning such an event required diplomacy as much as devotion. Both her lineage and her husband's had to be formally invited. Dignitaries, Dibia colleagues, royal connections, political officials. The list was endless. But EGWUREGWU did not intimidate easily. Her Umuada sisters and her age grade stood with her. The Asiebele compound transformed under coordinated effort. Fabrics, canopies, musicians, ritual spaces were all carefully mapped. Externally, everything moved with precision. Internally, the truth is, she was a bit unsettled. After the EOG priest had conducted Akunna's first divination, she had performed another in private. Only the senior NEOG was present, and only her long-kept assistant robot, redesigned many times by her late husband. A gift from her grandmother. A machine, yes, but also a lifelong companion. The divination confirmed what the first had not fully revealed. Akunna's awakening would begin at 1 year of age, and it would not be a subtle one. The uli markings that had once blazed across his skin had faded by 6 months. Only under full moons or charged spaces did they flicker faintly. By his first year, only trained eyes could see them. But the divination said something else. His gifts would increase with age. NEOG had comforted her.
Other children will lose touch with what they are born with. This one will grow into his.
That did not ease her heart though. It was not the power that frightened her. It was its unpredictability. She feared waking one day to find her child gone, carried by some newly manifested ability he did not yet understand. She could not ask her husband for counsel. Not yet. The astral channel he had taught her, EGWUREGWU, was too dangerous within a year of childbirth. Her spiritual senses were still exposed. Astral travel carried the risk of not returning. So she waited. And she worried. Two weeks before the festival, she sat in her study reading through Fodelichiku's notebooks. They contained pages filled with Ogwu calculations and coded diagrams. Akunna played quietly on the mat nearby, laughing to himself. She thought of their plan. The satellite had always been camouflage. The clone body, her idea. His death, which was staged. He had warned her long before marriage that he would one day leave Earth. His mother had made that clear. And yet, knowing it did not lessen the ache. They had been promised 3 years together. They had taken Allah's blessing to conceive. Allah had granted one child and one only. Now, sitting in the quiet of her study, she realized something. She could not wait until after the festival. She needed to see him soon. At dawn on Oriemaka Day, she dressed in all white, adorned with red beads. She brought offerings in a woven basket and went to Idemili's shrine. She would not invoke the goddess without gifts. She knew better. When she called that morning, EGWUREGWU answered faster than expected. The deity's presence arrived like rain, heavy, cleansing rain. The air smelled faintly of roses. "Daughter," EGWUREGWU said, "why have you left your son to call on me so early?" Ekwensu bowed.
Nim, I seek protection to travel astrally and speak to my husband.
EGWUREGWU did not respond immediately. "Go on, Eke," she said at last. "The day you were born. Go then, and you will have my protection. Go on any other day, and you will answer to Akwo Kalete, guardians of boundaries." Then, softer, "And bring my child to me soon. You have kept him away long enough." The goddess's presence withdrew. Ekwensu returned home to prepare. On Eke, she entered her meditation chamber. Mzu marked her palms and brow. She surrendered her body to stillness. It took 30 minutes for her consciousness to shift fully. When she emerged into the astral plane, butterflies of light surrounded her, a symbol of EGWUREGWU's protection. She called her husband's presence, and he appeared. She moved to embrace him, and he stopped her. "Obim," he said gently, "you cannot touch me." She felt anger rise immediately.
Why?
"I am undergoing ritual preparation on Mvu. I am to be renamed and remade." Her breath caught. "That was not part of the plan. I was informed only yesterday," he said. "I have little say." She told him of Akunna, of the divinations, of her fear. He listened intently, his eyes soft with love for her, voice steady. "Use the Ekwensu spells in my notebook," he told her. "Ask for wisdom. My mother will answer." Then he began to fade. "I do not know when I will see you again," he said, "but I will come for you when the time is right." She could not answer before he vanished. When she returned to her body, the weight of the experience broke her. Their plan had shifted. He was not meant to be unreachable. Now she might never see him again. She wept until exhaustion overtook her anger. Her Ndimiri gathered silently around her, waiting impatiently to be engaged. She sent one message through them to EGWUREGWU.
Put a hold on Akunna's awakening until he turns 17.
The answer came back swiftly. "So shall it be." She felt relief enter her bones like a breath of fresh air. The next day, Isiora glittered. The Prime Minister of EGEDE attended Akunna's birthday festival. High life music filled the air with legends and modern voices on cue. And NKILI came. Not 3, 4. A number unseen in nearly a century. The towering cone-shaped figures moved with impossible grace. At times they collapsed into fabrics. At times they leapt beyond human physics. Some of the dignitaries were visibly unsettled by the masquerade performance. Still, the message was clear. Ekwensu had not lost favor. She took a moment to announce her return to service to the beaming guests. The crowd roared. Akunna, drowsy and delighted, clapped from her lap before being taken inside to rest. The celebration shook the whole of Isiora that day. Two days later, she took Akunna to EGWUREGWU's shrine. A white cow, just acquired the day before by her assistants, waited. Offerings were prepared. Invocations were spoken. mother and child entered a state of grace in meditation. 2 hours passed. When they returned to themselves, the decree was sealed. Akunna would not manifest any of his prophesied giftings until 17. He was now fortified, protected, and bound under EGEDE's watch. That night, for the first time in months, EGWUREGWU slept without fear. Akunna, Chapter 5. For years, Akunna's sleep was never fully his. Dreams came with inexplicable weight. Nightmares came in different shapes and forms. At first, he could not explain them, only wake up breathing too hard, eyes too wide, like one possessed. Hearing things spoken into his ear in the dark in a language his mouth was not yet old enough to repeat. When he grew older and his words matured, he began to describe what he saw. A sky that wasn't Earth's. A woman too tall to be human, with hair that moved like living threads. Green eyes that looked like stars seen underwater. A feeling, always the same, of being watched by something that felt like it has claim to him. EGWUREGWU listened to his recount once, listened twice. Then she understood who it was. Ibobo, Ufodilichukwu's mother, Akunna's grandmother, the one who had hovered above Isiora the day Akunna was born, the one whose name's humans had fastened to an ogu without knowing they were borrowing it from a being older than their myths. Ibobo had been trying to reach her grandson, and Ibobo was not pleased. Not pleased that years had passed and Akunna had not made contact. Not pleased that the doors remained shut. So, EGWUREGWU did what mothers do when gods come for their children. She blocked the door with all her might. She slipped herbs beneath his bed, sewed portions into his pillowcase, drew protective markings in places his eyes would never think to look. The remedies worked well enough. The dreams came less frequently. The nightmares thinned. But the pressure was only postponed. When Akunna turned 7, she performed a cord-cutting ritual, quiet and exact, severing the channel through which Ibobo's energy kept slipping through. After that, the dreams stopped completely, and the house became quieter. Too quiet. EGWUREGWU did not call it betrayal aloud, but the word lived in her. It had been years since she last saw Ufodilichukwu in the astral plane, years since he appeared, unable to let her touch him, and was pulled away like a flame being snuffed by wind. For a year after that meeting, she tried. Weekly, sometimes more than once. She used every method she trusted, every technique she knew, every channel he had ever shown her. Nothing. Once, she tried summoning Ibobo directly. Ekwensu answered instead, and the message was straightforward. Stop.
He will come for you when the time is right,
Ekwensu said. So she waited. Akunna turned 3, then 5, then 7, and still no husband, no message, no sign. Slowly, an uglier understanding settled in her chest, that she had not been a co-conspirator in her husband's escape, but merely a piece moved across the board, a means to an end, a vessel for the child. That thought made her ashamed and angry and grief-tired. Ufodilichukwu had been the son of a deity whose nature was trickery itself. Maybe she should have known better. As time passed, she gathered most of her husband's belongings and moved them into his old lab. She turned it into storage. Then she locked it. Biometric seals, key cards, code combinations only she carried in her memory. Akunna could not enter without her presence, and she never spoke of his father inside their home, not once. Akunna asked questions at first, soft ones, careful ones, the way children ask when they sense pain behind an adult's eyes. He learned quickly that the name Ufodilichukwu was a wound in that house, so he stopped asking his mother. He found pieces of his father elsewhere, from his father's siblings, from strangers who spoke the name with reverence, from the Onowu, before the old kingmaker died, who had once watched his birth like a man watching a prophecy begin. All Akunna knew for certain was what the public knew. His father had been a genius, and he had died in an EGWU experiment gone wrong. That was the story the world accepted, so that was the story Akunna carried. Despite that silence around the subject of his father, Akunna loved his mother fiercely. EGWUREGWU was busy, always busy, but when she gave him time, she gave it fully. She told stories, played games, let him sit with her while she studied. Akunna learned not to poison those moments with the question of a man who was never returning. They lived quietly for a family with their kind of power, almost boring. And in the quiet, Akunna grew. By 15, he had become tall and beautiful, well-behaved, sharp-minded, and strong from years of sport. He played football, ran track, and carried muscles like a boy who had spent his childhood moving. He read constantly, drew when his mind needed rest, helped his aunties on the family farms when he could, walked home from school with friends, laughing the way teenagers laugh when the future still feels far away. When his mother worked in her study, he often sat nearby with a book of his own. It was how he stole more time with her without begging for it. Once every month, he accompanied her to EGEDE's shrine. Ceremonial songs, chanting, dancing, food, drinks, and spirit work braided into such celebrations. Akunna loved those days. He wished he could go more often, but his schedule was always packed with school and training. He understood why she restricted him. At the shrine, he also played his Oja flute. He had learned Ogene and Udu too, but the Oja had claimed him. By 15, he was a junior expert, good enough that elders sometimes paused to listen to him play. Akunna's life was full. There was little he lacked, and there was little he asked for that his mother did not eventually give, whenever she decided the time was right. Even companionship, she gave him in mechanical form. He had 2 assistant robots, Agbarakata, gifted by the Onowu when Akunna turned 7. Oga, newer, more advanced, gifted by his mother when he turned 15. He treated them like siblings. And in their home, this was not strange at all. Only his mother's old assistant was practically family too. The machine had aged beyond disguise. It moved stiffly now. Joints whining, no matter how many upgrades EGWUREGWU forced into its frame. In the Asiebele house, it was a running joke that anyone who suggested terminating Akunna was a traitor. Akunna, for her part, glared with red eyes, like she understood the insult. Akunna was thoroughly trained in the ways of his ancestors. He practiced Igom more in the meditation room when he remembered. Some mornings, he poured libations to Allah, under open sky. He knew folk tales, traditional songs, mythologies, so many that his friends called him Bo Scholar as a nickname. He read fast, too fast. Even his mother could not keep up with his requests for books. That hunger was not new to Ekwensu, and it was not unfamiliar. Everyone who knew Ufodilichukwu's genius saw the shape of inheritance taking form in Akunna. Atani Training College was approaching graduation season. Akunna was in his final school year, with only a few months left. Each year, graduating students were selected to represent their schools at a nationwide competition, EGWUREGWU High Flyer Competition, a 6-week convergence of sports and arts hosted in Aba. Permission slips arrived like destiny. Akunna's name was near the top of the list. The next day, Eke Market Day, his mother's day of rest. He waited until evening after football practice. He showered, changed, and then went searching for her. He found her in the backyard, crouched beside Aunli, repairing something that had broken again. "Mommy," he said, laughing as he hugged her from behind. "Not this again. Why don't you put Aunli out of her misery?" Aunli turned her head slowly. Her red eyes narrowed. Ekwensu chuckled but didn't look up.
Akum, don't let Aunli come for you with that nonsense. How was practice? I hope you're showing them your inner JJ Okocha.
Akunna grinned. "I'm trying." Then he lifted the forms in his hand. "I came to talk to you about something." She glanced at the papers.
What are you holding?
"I got selected," he said quickly before courage could spoil. "EGWUREGWU, Abba, I'm representing the school." Ekwensu stayed quiet, still working. Quiet in the way she became when she was measuring a decision. Akunna continued, careful. "I have 5 forms, not all sports. Some are creative arts, painting, instruments, even board games. But the main sports are football and track." Her hands paused. Finally, she asked,
How long?
"Up to 6 weeks." That made her stop fully. She looked at him then, properly. In 15 years, Akunna had never been away from her longer than 2 weeks. He could tell she was calculating more than distance, more than logistics. She was measuring the world. Akunna swallowed. "Mommy, you're not saying anything." She exhaled. Then her voice softened.
You've grown so much, Akum,
She said.
What can I say? You're an eagle. I have to let you fly.
Relief flooded him so fast he almost laughed.
But
She added, raising one finger.
pick only 2 activities. Don't let ambition scatter you. I will sign 2 after I speak with your administrator. I need details. Where you will stay, who will supervise you.
She stared at him for a moment longer, then nodded once, decisive.
But don't worry, Nam. You will go.
Akunna's smile broke wide. He hugged her again, tighter this time. Thank you, Mommy. With Aunli leading, slow, offended, and loud with mechanical joints, he went inside for early dinner. As they walked, Ekwensu asked, almost casually,
Am I invited to watch?
Akunna's face brightened again. You are. I want you there,
I will do my best.
she said. And she meant it. 1 week after final exams, Atani Training College began onboarding students for the trip. Graduating class, participants, supporters. Abba waited. And for the first time in his life, Akunna prepared to live beyond his mother's shadow for more than a few days. EGWUREGWU EGEDE Competition Chapter 6 They left on a sunny Afo market morning. Students arrived at the school gate in clusters. Most dropped off by parents or relatives. Luggage stacked, uniforms crisp, voices too loud with excitement. Atani Training College's bus waited with its engine humming and its windows tinted against heat. Before Ezewanyugo drove Akunna to school that morning, she sat him down in the house and went over the rules again, slowly, the way one repeats an incantation to make it stick. What not to eat, what not to buy, what questions to ask before he paid for anything. Then, she opened his suitcase and checked his packing with the seriousness of ritual. She double-checked his phone, his tablets, also his game console and e-reader, and every device meant to keep him tethered to home. Akunna's robot could not travel with him, so he charged his portable Kpakpando device overnight. Through it, he could still give Abarakata and Oga instructions from a distance. He could see through their eyes if he wanted. He could control them remotely. It comforted him. It comforted his mother more. When she was finally satisfied, she drove him to school. At the bus, she slipped a small plastic bag into his palm. Bitter cola.
If anything makes you feel strange,
She warned.
chew one. Don't argue with your body and don't argue with me.
Akunna smiled. Yes, mommy. They hugged. She held him half a second longer than necessary, then released him like she was forcing her hands to obey.
I'll come for some of the events,
She promised.
if I can.
Akunna's chest lifted with pride. Okay. Then the bus swallowed him into a new experience. He was excited in a way he had never been. This was the first time he would leave Omambala for another part of EGEDE. His 16th birthday was only 2 months away, and for years he had wished to see somewhere else before that day arrived. His mother had agreed with surprising ease. She had signed 2 permission slips after speaking to the administrators, for football and music, nothing more. The first hour of the trip was noisy. Laughter, shouting, inside jokes, music leaking from earbuds. Eventually, the bus softened into quiet. Some students slept, others leaned into screens. 3 teachers and 2 security officers rode with them. The road trip to Aba took almost 5 hours. Aba announced itself before it fully appeared. Traffic thickened, buildings rose, billboards glowed, and the city moved with a sharper electrical feeling than Omambala, faster, louder, and more cosmopolitan. Akunna had heard stories about Aba all his life. Ariaria International Market, traders who could build anything, streets where invention and hustle walked side by side. When the bus neared the hostels, drone hawkers swarmed them, small machines knocking incessantly at windows, voices looping in programmed cheer.
Plantain chips, soft drinks. Buy now.
One drone drifted towards a girl at the back of the bus. Refusing to look away from her device, the drone tapped harder, persistent, almost rude. Thankfully, the windows were sealed and the air conditioner held the heat outside like a locked door. By the time they arrived, the students were tired. Orientation took nearly an hour. Rules, routes, assembly points, canteen schedules, so many boundaries. Then they were told to gather in the main canteen to eat and meet students from other schools. Akunna recorded a short video message for his mother. We arrived safely, Mommy. The hostel is clean. I am fine. He told her he had been assigned a good room. He would share with Chukwuemeka, one of his closest friends, a name his mother already knew well enough to trust. Ada. It was later that afternoon, after food and the first wave of socializing, that Akunna saw her. She sat in a corner of the canteen, not far from his table, wearing a green dress patterned with small flowers. She laughed with a group of students, hands moving as she spoke, her confidence easy, like she had never learned to shrink. Akunna forgot what he was doing. He stared for too long. She felt it and turned. Their eyes met. And in that instant, he understood something about himself that he had never needed to know before. His body betrayed him without warning. His breath caught. His chest tightened. His thoughts flickered. He stood up, because standing was the only thing that made sense. Then he walked straight to her. "My name is Akunna," he said. "Akunna Asiebele." She smiled like she had been expecting him.
Ada Ngozi Chukwuka Nsobu,
she replied. They spoke easy, quick, like friends who had already met in some other life and were only remembering. Akunna learned she was a year older than him, that she was from Abiriba. Her father was Chief Anyansi Ogodo Nsobu, a renowned and feared dibia. Ada learned who Akunna's mother was and did not pretend not to know.
"Your family story is hard to miss,"
she admitted.
"News moves fast in EGEDE."
They became friends before the day ended. Instantly, naturally. It was as if the city had conspired to introduce them on purpose. What Ada did not tell Akunna was that her last name carried in certain circles. She did not tell him that it was alleged her father had played a role in the death of Ekwensu's mother. She did not tell him she was estranged from him, or that people whispered he had been responsible for his own wife's death too, Ada's mother. Ada had been raised by her grandmother, an Uli artist who took her in after her mother died. She had grown up with stories that stuck like smoke in fabric. Stories about the connections between her father and other powerful families. But she had just met Akunna, and she liked him too much to let her father's shadow step between them immediately. She told herself what young people always tell themselves when they want to be free.
"We are a different generation. Nothing will go wrong."
The weeks moved quickly. Ada was a disciplined and relentless swimmer. When the hostel pool closed for maintenance, she found another one for practice. She trained like a true champion, sure of victory, ready to show the world where to place the crown. Akunna competed in football and music. He surprised even himself with how calm he became under pressure. He made it to the finals for Oja flute. He made it to the finals for football. They spent every free hour together. They took walks in allowed zones, had conversations that stretched into late evenings, watching other events and cheering their friends, sitting together in the canteen until it became normal. By the second week, people were calling them a couple. They didn't correct anyone. Ada loved listening to Akunna describe Isiora, the EOG shrine, the lake behind it, the crocodiles that emerged when live offerings were brought. She laughed when he described them like stubborn elders. He teased her about her 2 ex-boyfriends. She teased him harder when she discovered he had never had a girlfriend.
"I'm going to be your first heartbreak," she announced.
Akunna smiled. "Then I will be your third." Akunna kept his mother updated daily. He told her about the hostel, the teachers, the food, the trips they took in groups. He told her about visiting Ariaria market with a guide. He told her how he almost bent to look between his legs until the guide snapped at him and ordered them to stop the foolishness. That story earned him a scolding, fierce enough to make him laugh nervously.
"You should know better.
Ekwensu told him.
You are meant to stop your friends, not lead them in that sort of nonsense."
He apologized quickly, and he told her everything, except Ada. He wanted to enjoy this for himself first, without any interrogation, without spiritual scrutiny, without the 1,000 cautious questions his mother would ask. Ada, on her part, told her grandmother only that she had met someone. She did not say who. She wanted happiness without history interrupting. Ada won swimming, first place. Another girl from her school took third. Akunna won in music, first place with his Oja flute. His school placed fourth in football after losing the match. When finals week arrived, EGWUREGWU flew into Aba in a 2-person pod and checked into a hotel. She came to watch the last events. Akunna was proud to see her. That evening, she visited him in the hostel and inspected the facility with a careful eye. It was clean, secure, and properly guarded. She was satisfied that the school had kept its promise. She already knew from their calls that he was eating only what she allowed. The hostel had systems for students with special dietary needs. Still, when she sat with him in the leisure hall, surrounded by walls decorated with local art, she felt something was amiss and did not like the feeling. Nothing was wrong with his behavior. He was excited, respectful, eager to show her everything. But his aura had changed. Something was off. Like cloth slightly misaligned over skin, when she prepared to leave, she asked him plainly if he had done anything forbidden. Akunna said no. She believed him, or tried to. She told herself it was simply distance. A new environment, too many unfamiliar energies around her son. Akunna tried to introduce Ada to his mother, but each time EGWUREGWU appeared, Ada was nowhere to be found. At first, he thought it was mere coincidence. Then, he realized it was a strategy. When he confronted her, Ada offered him half the truth.
Aku, my father is not a good man,
she said, feeling ashamed.
He's known for evil. I'm estranged from him. If your mother knew my family name, she may not want you near me.
Akunna frowned. You think my mother judges people by gossip? Ada swallowed.
I think your mother is powerful enough to know the difference between rumor and warning.
Then she said what scattered his anger.
I've fallen in love with you.
The words hit him like heat. Everything else shrank. He pulled her into his arms. I love you too. He told her he would keep her away until she was ready. Ada smiled with relief, but inside, she was still counting the ways her last name could destroy what she wanted. When the competition ended, the students returned home in good spirits. Akunna and Ada became official the day before departure. They promised daily calls, easy plans, future visits, a relationship built on fresh air and new freedom, now that school was over. Ada did not want to attend university. She wanted to master Uli art under her grandmother's guidance. Akunna wasn't sure yet what he wanted. For now, he planned to enjoy a year doing what he already loved, just as his mother had advised. Aba had given him victory, a girl, a taste of life beyond Isiora, and a secret waiting behind a last name. The beginning of the end. Chapter 7. Ada made it to Akunna's birthday. She didn't stay long. She had to return to Aba the same day, but she came. And in the brief pocket of privacy they stole from the noise of the compound, she gave him a gift that left his ears hot for hours afterward. Their first kiss. Akunna laughed afterward like a boy who had just discovered a new kind of sunlight. This is the best gift ever, he proclaimed. Ada rolled her eyes, smiling, and told him to stop being dramatic. He didn't. For now, they were a happy young couple, young enough to believe happiness could remain uncomplicated if you held onto it tightly enough. For his 16th birthday, EGWUREGWU gave him something else, a trip to Mali, the Dogon country. Akunna had obsessed with Dogon knowledge systems for years, raving about their astronomy, their architecture, their coded cosmologies. When his mother announced her gift, his throat closed with emotion. He blinked too hard, trying not to show it. "Mommy?" he managed. Ekwensu smiled like she had been anticipating that exact reaction. He was allowed to go with 2 friends, but there was a condition. One adult would accompany them, MAZI, one of Ufodelichukwu's younger brothers. Akunna liked Uncle Ebuka. He was cool in the way older men rarely were. Present without trying to dominate every space. Protective without being overbearing. The weekend after Akunna's birthday, the 4 of them left for Mali for a 2-week vacation. Ekwensu watched them go with a face calm enough to fool strangers. But inside her chest, a new realization tightened. 16. Akunna had been a baby yesterday. Now he was 16. And in 1 year, the binding she had begged EGEDE for would expire. She had agreed to hold off his awakening until 17. Not 18. Not 20. 17. A year away. And he still did not know what he was. She had hidden too much for too long. She had kept her husband's journals locked away, kept Akunna out of the lab, kept the full truth buried beneath rituals and silence and the ordinary flow of days. But a year from now, Akunna's blood would begin to speak, and blood did not ask permission. The time had come for the conversation she had postponed for 16 years. She would tell him everything when he returned. Before then, she needed strength, wisdom. So, a few days after Akunna left for Mali, she went to EGWUREGWU's shrine. The shrine was quiet that day. Her assistants prepared supplies, helped her make medicine for clients, then withdrew when she dismissed them. Alone, Ekwensu sat before one of the 8 altars, spine straight, palms open, and began her invocations. The oshimiri beside the shrine shifted as she continued to invoke. The wind changed. The air thickened with presence. EGEDE arrived. This time, the voice came from behind her, close as breath. And when Ekwensu turned, she saw the goddess emerging from the river like a being stepping out of a doorway. The air smelled like daffodils. "Daughter of EGEDE," the goddess said, "what weighs on your heart so heavily that you call on me at an hour of rest? Why not send a messenger?" Ekwensu bowed her head.
Mother, permit me to look upon you.
"You may," EGEDE said, amused. "Offer me a seat. Be at ease. Udodi." EGEDE was light-hearted that evening. Even the river behind her returned to calm as she entered the shrine. Ekwensu placed a bowl of washed fruits before her. EGEDE ate as a goddess who has all the time in the world eats. Only then did Ekwensu speak.
Nemi, the time has come. In 1 year, Akunna will be 17. I must tell him of his true nature. I have come to seek your strength and your wisdom to do what must be done.
She exhaled as if releasing a weight of stone from her chest. EGEDE did not answer immediately. Instead, she lifted a fruit and said, almost casually, "Eat with me. Or have you served me what you cannot eat?" Ekwensu picked the fruit from the bowl and ate. Only then did EGEDE's eyes sharpen. "Who is the girl your son sings to by my river in the evenings?" Ekwensu froze. "My messengers bring me word," EGEDE continued. "They say he sits by my shores, speaking on his device to a strange girl. They say he is in love." Ekwensu swallowed.
Mother, I do not know of any girl.
EGEDE studied her face and seemed satisfied. "That is why I ask. Because you must look into it." Then, Idemili's voice shifted, less playful now, more like a rain gathering in the distance.
The girl has bad blood. Her father defies my will. The girl will put your son in danger.
Ezewanyugo kept her voice respectful, even as discomfort rose in her belly.
Ekenem, tell me what I must do.
Idemili reached to one side and picked up a carved figure, an image of a woman with long hair and a snake coiled around her neck. She squinted at it, smiled and said,
It looks nothing like me.
Then she placed it down again as though it was irrelevant.
Tell him,
Idemili said.
Tell him all he must know.
And the goddess named what Ezewanyugo had avoided naming even in her private thoughts.
He is the grandson to Ekwensu, first generation descendant of Ibobo, son of you, Akunna Achalugo, daughter of mine.
Ezewanyugo listened like a student being given the final lesson before a storm.
If he truly has your blood,
Idemili went on,
he will take the truth. He has no choice. He must prepare. And you must also prepare, because they will come for him.
Ezewanyugo's throat tightened.
Is there anything else?
She asked quietly. Idemili was silent for a moment, as if listening to something outside the shrine. Then she rose.
You can feel it already,
she said.
That is why you ask.
The goddess turned towards the river.
She is coming, Ibobo. She will come to me first. We are divine sisters. We will come to a resolution.
Idemili's gaze returned to Ezewanyugo, steady and uncompromising.
When Ibobo comes to you, remember who you are, daughter of Idemili. Speak the truth, and she will show you mercy.
Then, more softly, but with no less finality,
do not keep your child from her anymore. From this day forth, resistance will no longer be the way forward. Let your anger towards your husband remain between you and him alone.
Idemili stepped closer and touched Ezewanyugo's head with a blessing.
Jisike, all is already well.
By the time Idemili took her leave, nighttime had fully arrived. Ezewanyugo went home with resolve burning behind her eyes, and with a new fear settling in her bones. Her son had a girl, and she did not know of her until now. Akunna returned from Mali, darker from sun and wind, laughing about the heat, teasing his robots when they asked if the sun in that part of West Africa burned hotter. He had missed Agbarakata and Oga despite sending them updates daily through his portable Kwakwando device. Their responses had helped him decode half the things the tour guides couldn't explain. He brought his mother gifts. He also bought gifts for Ada and began planning how to see her again, maybe a same-day pod trip. Ezewanyugo let him rest for a full day before calling him to her room. She thanked him for the gifts, told him she liked them. Then she asked, carefully,
Is there anything private you want to tell me?
Akunna recognized the look on her face. The look that meant she already knew the shape of his secret. He sighed, relief creeping in despite himself. You know about Ada. Ezewanyugo's eyes stayed calm.
Is that her real name? Or are you testing me?
Mommy, he groaned. Her name is Ada. And yes, I love her. She's my girlfriend. We met in Aba. He rushed the words out, then slowed, trying to soften them. Please, don't be angry that I didn't tell you. I had reasons. Ezewanyugo smiled like she was scolding a child for stealing meat.
Akunna, what reasons could you have? Is she not your first girlfriend? Did you think I wouldn't be happy? Or you think I don't want grandkids?
She shook her head, amused.
Small boy of yesterday.
Akunna laughed nervously and leaned forward. Let me explain. He told her he had wanted to introduce Ada during finals, but Ada had avoided her. He told her Ada was intimidated, that they argued and Ada confessed her fear. She said, "You would recognize her family name," Akunna said. "That her father is not a good man." Ezewanyogo's smile faded slightly.
And what is the family name?
Nso, Akunna began. Nsobu. They are from Abiriba. Her father is a powerful dibia. The world inside Ezewanyogo sharpened. Nsobu. Abiriba. And suddenly, the past rose like a blade. A man she had sworn before her community and ancestors that she would not spare if she ever saw him again. A man whose shadow had swallowed too many lives. She kept her face controlled, but her voice tightened.
Akun, what is her father's full name?
Akunna frowned. "I can't remember the full name, but I can find out."
Don't call her now.
Ezewanyogo said quickly, then steadied herself.
We will speak of it tomorrow.
Akunna studied her, unsettled. "Mommy, what is it?" Ezewanyogo inhaled. Then she said the words Akunna had never heard in 16 years of life.
I want to talk to you about your father.
Akunna's mouth went dry. They spoke for hours. And when Ezewanyogo finally opened the sealed room of truth, she offered everything in it without holding back. Ufodilichukwu's origin, his deity mother, Mvu, the clone, the staged death, the plan, the astral meeting, the renaming and remaking, the rituals she performed to delay Akunna's awakening. She told him the truth she had buried away for so long. Akunna listened in shock. Then he broke down. He wept like a boy who had lost his father twice, once to the grave and once to the lie. He had visited the grave almost every month since he was old enough to walk there alone. And now he was being told the grave was a mask, a performance, his whole life built on a story that wasn't true. The rage he felt was immeasurable, but not directed at his mother. He simply looked hollowed out, heartbroken. "I'm not even fully human," he whispered. And my dad? Where is he now?" he asked through his choking sob. Ezewanyogo apologized. She knew even though her intentions were pure, it still hurt, especially since to her son, it came out as deception. She promised to tell him all about his father's whereabouts another time. When Akunna could not hold the weight anymore, he asked for permission to leave. "I need to be alone." Ezewanyogo let him go, though fear clenched her throat.
Call me if you need me.
She said.
Anything.
He nodded and disappeared into his room. Ezewanyogo could not sleep. She sat in her study, unable to read, unable to pray, unable to do anything but listen for his footsteps. Anwuli massaged her feet with shea butter, quiet as the priestess. The house felt haunted by what had been spoken. Past midnight, footsteps finally came. Akunna walked out, moved towards her room, then stopped when he saw her in the hallway. "Mommy," he said softly, "I'm okay." Even in grief, he had come to check on her. That broke something in Ezewanyogo's chest. She hugged him and he hugged her back. They sat together in the study and talked into the night. He asked many questions. She answered all of them. When exhaustion finally claimed both of them, Akunna said, "I want to see his things." Ezewanyogo nodded.
"Tomorrow."
He also said, carefully, "We should talk about Ada." Ezewanyogo agreed.
"Tomorrow,"
she said again. And in that word, a quiet dread waited. Because tomorrow was where consequences lived. The End of the Beginning. Chapter 8. Ezewanyogo rose early the next day feeling steadier than she had the night before. She sent word to her shrine assistants that she would take the day off. She sent Anwuli to Onitsha main market with errands. Agbarakata and Oga were nowhere in sight, as usual, and she assumed they had stayed near Akunna through the night. By midday, Akunna finally emerged from his room. He ate late breakfast in silence, then joined his mother in the living room. She had been waiting for him with trembling patience. He sat, rubbed his palms together once, then tried to force lightness into his voice. "So, Mommy, all this time I thought I was the man of the house. Meanwhile, you've been the one keeping the secrets." They both laughed, his laugh thin at the edges, hers softer, grateful that he was trying. Ezewanyogo reached for his hand and held it. Then she asked about Ada. And as Akunna spoke about Abriba, about the name, about the girl's father, Ezewanyogo felt the past stand up inside her like a long shadowed thing that had been waiting to step into the light of her life. When Akunna finally said it fully again, this time with the context he has already provided. "Her surname is Nsobu." Ezewanyogo closed her eyes for half a breath. Then she opened them and chose her words the way one chooses where to step in a river with hidden stones.
"Akun, the man you are describing is responsible for your grandmother's death."
Akunna's face changed. He knew his mother did not speak that kind of sentence lightly.
"My mother,"
Ezewanyogo continued,
"was a Dibia. I inherited my gifts through her hands. The man you call Ada's father, he was exposed for using Nshi, bad magic."
Akunna swallowed. "Mommy, what did he do?" Ezewanyogo did not soften the truth.
"He used his wife. And when your grandmother discovered it, she exposed him."
Akunna stared, struggling to place the story inside his understanding of the world. Ezewanyogo went on, doing her best to keep her voice steady.
"The wife he took from our village. Her name was NKILI. After she died mysteriously, her body was returned home as custom demands. Your grandmother inspected her and saw what had been done."
Akunna's throat tightened. "Why would a man kill his own wife?"
"Power,"
Ezewanyogo said simply.
"There are people who harvest souls the way others harvest yams. They bind spirits into service. That is how they build strength."
Akunna shook his head, as if the motion could shake the meaning loose. "And my grandmother?" Ezewanyogo's gaze hardened.
That night, after he was exposed, he pretended he would face the Alusi and swear his innocence the next day. The community made him sleep over so he wouldn't escape.
Her fingers tightened slightly on Akunna's hands.
But he came to our compound in the dark. He found the thing that kept your grandmother alive.
Akunna frowned. "What thing?"
Akbobi,
Ezewanyogo said. And the name itself carried weight. She explained it without ceremony, only what Akunna needed to know.
It was an Oku, a vessel, a rule-bound protection. If it fell, if it touched the ground even once, her life would end.
Akunna's eyes widened. Ezewanyogo nodded once.
He threw it down.
A long silence opened between them. Akunna rose and began pacing, as if his legs were trying to outrun the images forming in his mind. Then, Ezewanyogo said the second blade of truth.
Akun, I swore an oath before my people, before the spirits. I promised that if I ever set my eyes on that man or any of his descendants, I would avenge my mother.
Akunna stopped. His chest rose and fell too fast. You mean, he whispered, frightened of the answer. You mean you would kill Ada? Ekwensu did not flinch.
I was young when I swore it,
she said.
But I cannot pull an oath back once it has been accepted. I am bound.
Akunna turned away. The room felt too small for what was happening inside his head. Yesterday he had learned his father was not dead, that his bloodline was not fully human. Today he was being told his mother's oath hung over the girl he loved like a blade. It was too much. He asked for space. He asked for access to his father's lab. His father's hidden life, locked behind years. Ekwensu agreed. She opened the biometric lock herself and let him enter the lab. And when he asked to be left alone, she did. But she instructed Auni to keep watch from a distance, the way a guardian watches a doorway. Akunna disappeared into the old lab for days. The lab had become storage, but it still smelled faintly of his father. The scent of metal, oils, dried herbs, and electric dust lingered in the air. The shelves had journals, folders, hard drives, coded artifacts, strange prototypes with names written in Ekwensu's hand. Akunna read like a starving person. He found flight sketches, coordinates, notes about Mvu, pages and pages on Ekwensu, half science, half scripture. Then he found something that had to be totally unreal. A DNA drive. He stared at it for a long time before he dared to touch it. Ekwensu had stored data in biological code. He had left instructions, calm, precise dictates, describing how the information could be unlocked in the body of a carrier, becoming memory over time. Akunna's mind went blank with awe. When he finally showed it to his mother, she was not surprised. He told her he was not ready to use it. Not now. Maybe never. Ekwensu exhaled with relief she tried not to show.
Keep it safe,
she said. Akunna nodded. Then he went back into the lab. Ada called him relentlessly. Akunna did not answer. Not for 5 days. His body began to protest the constant reading, the lack of rest. When even his eyes felt swollen, he finally picked up his phone and called her back. Ada answered, furious. Her voice cracked with anger and relief.
You disappeared,
she said.
5 days, Akunna.
He apologized. He tried to explain. She did not want explanations, not until he promised he would come in person to see her. Only then did her anger soften. He told his mother he was going out. Then he booked the next available pod to Aba. Ada's compound announced her grandmother's artistry before Ada even appeared. Mud walls traced with uli designs. White, black, orange, gold. Patterns that felt like their own language. Akunna called from outside the electric gate. Ada buzzed him in. She ran to him and hugged him hard, then kissed his face again and again, like she was trying to erase the days he had vanished. Her grandmother was not home, so they were alone. But Akunna's mood was all wrong. He seemed too still, too uptight. Ada sensed it quickly and became uneasy.
What's going on?
She asked. Akunna swallowed. I have a lot on my mind. He told her he could only stay a short while. Her face tightened again. He reached for her hands. Babe, I came to tell you something serious. Ada's eyes flashed with panic.
What?
She demanded.
Just say it.
Akunna's voice dropped. My mother knows who you are. Ada's breath hitched. She told me things. He went on. Things about your father. Things I can't unhear. Ada's eyes shone.
Aku, are you breaking up with me?
He shook his head quickly. No, but listen to me. He forced the words out carefully, painfully. You cannot come near my mother. You cannot come near my house, not even close. Promise me. Ada blinked, confused. Then relief hit her so hard she started crying.
That's it?
She whispered.
That's what you came to say?
It's not small, Akunna said. You and my mother, you're the two women I love the most. I can't lose either of you. Ada nodded quickly through tears.
I promise,
she said.
I promise.
They clung to each other. They talked. They tried to pretend the world outside their embrace wasn't sharpening its knives. When time ran out, Akunna kissed her goodbye and returned home. When EGWUREGWU asked about Ada later, Akunna said simply, "She's history." He hated the lie as soon as he spoke it. But he spoke it anyway, and the lie became the first hole in the road ahead that would swallow him. Months passed. Akunna lived in his father's lab. He read, he catalogued, he decoded. He found more notes than any one mind should hold. Some pages felt less like research and more like transmission. As if Ufodilichukwu had been taking dictations from something older than Earth. Akunna kept the spell book separate, and he kept the DNA drive separate too, a forbidden pair. Still, the more he read, the more one obsession grew deep inside him. Ada. Her bloodline. His mother's oath. If his mother was right, if Ada was truly trapped beneath her father's stain, then Akunna would find a way to cleanse what had been inherited. This was his new obsession. If he truly carried Ekwensu's blood, he would not accept helplessness. He would not make Ada pay for her father's sins. He would find a way. When he finally felt ready to share more, he called Ada and showed her the lab through video. He told her about the DNA drive. He described what he could do. Ada stared, as if he had shown her a star captured in his hand. The next time they met, he brought a copy to show her in person. Proof that he was not exaggerating. For the meeting, he told his mother he was sleeping over at a friend's house. That part was true. The part he did not say was that Ada would also be there. His friends didn't object. Some had brought their girlfriends too. It felt harmless. It felt normal. Akunna showed Ada the drive near the end of the night. Quickly, privately, then slipped it away again. Ada left early by pod to reach home before dark. After she left, Akunna reached for the drive, and he felt empty air. He searched again, and again. His throat tightened. He tried to stay calm through the rest of the night, pretending he wasn't tearing the room apart inside his mind. By morning, the drive still hadn't appeared, and Ada's line was unreachable. His panic rose. By afternoon, she finally picked up. Akunna's voice broke as soon as he heard her. "Ada, why has your line been unreachable? I can't find it. The drive, Before she could answer, another voice caught in. A harsh, older male voice.
If you want it, come and take it yourself,
the voice said, amused.
I dare you.
A pause, like the speaker enjoyed the sound of Akunna's breathing.
Thank you,
the man continued,
for your contribution to my family. As we speak, your father's knowledge is flowing into Ogodonsobu blood.
Then the line went dead. Akunna stood frozen. He knew that voice. Or rather, he knew what it could only belong to. Chief Anyansi Ogodo Nsobu, Ada's father. The man his mother had warned him about. the man whose act of wickedness had killed his grandmother. They had played him. They had taken what he guarded, and they had taken it through love. Akunna's stomach turned. His ears roared. His heart felt too large for his chest. For a moment, he couldn't breathe like a normal person. Only shallow, sharp breaths, as if his body was being chased. He stumbled back into his room. The thought came fast and merciless. I have destroyed us. He imagined his mother's face when she found out. He imagined Ada's tears as lies. He imagined the future his father's knowledge might build in the wrong hands. Shame flooded him so completely he felt submerged. He wanted to escape the feeling. He wanted to erase the moment. He wanted to disappear from the consequences. That evening, Ekwensu returned home with anxiety humming in her bones. She called Akunna. No answer. She knocked. Nothing. She called again, voice rising despite herself. No response. Then fear took her fully. In a state of panic, she forced his room door open and found her only child collapsed inside. Still. Too still. His blood flow had run cold. The house, the shrine of her life, went silent in a way it had never been silenced before. Ekwensu fell to her knees, and the scream that tore out of her lungs in that moment did not sound human. Akunna Achalugo Asiebele died less than 4 months before his 17th birthday, broken by shame, fear, and the trap laid maliciously inside the name of the one he thought he loved. And so ended the beginning. To be continued. Author's endnote. Dear listener, thank you for making it this far. I can't wait to reveal more of this story. That's why The Age of Ekwensu is a trilogy, and Akunna is only the first book. To bring book 2 to life, I need your support. If you enjoyed the story, if you'd like to see more narratives that weave Igbo cosmology into stories that are both futuristic and centered on tradition, please help spread the word. Share the book with someone who might enjoy it. Gift a friend a digital or physical copy. Donate a physical copy to your local library or recommend it on social media channels. Every small action helps us continue creating stories that center Igbo worldview. Thank you sincerely for all the support you've shown so far. Oma. Author's bio. Oma is an Igbo writer, storyteller, and mystic. Her mission with this book series is to explore the intersection of Igbo cosmology, speculative fiction, and futuristic philosophy. This body of work blends mythology, science fiction, and cultural memory to imagine worlds where ancient knowledge and advanced civilizations coexist. The Age of Ekwensu trilogy is her first major speculative saga.